I want to reiterate what Brother Neither has just said. We do serve a mighty God. And I'll add, we serve a mighty steadfast God. As we looked at this morning, we talked about the steadfastness of God. And that final point, I like to sometimes use that for our devotional to expound upon it even further. And the idea is that God is steadfast. He's unchanging in his forgiveness. That's why we know he's steadfast. And we looked at Exodus chapter 34, verse 7. Exodus 34, verse 7. It says, he was keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But then it said, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. We spent a moment looking at how this has been really pulled from its context, and it has been utilized to really describe God's nature and possible, other examples we have of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And you see how one father can make a decision that will affect the third and fourth generation. We discussed how this is not referring to a great-grandchild walking around and all of a sudden it has an exaction of a curse that was on their great-grandfather that they never knew. God was not making a generality here. And I think we need to understand that this is not concerning the nature of God applied to all people for all time. This is applied to the generation of fathers that were there. And we discussed the concept in chapter 32 that these were the fathers, those patriarchs led their families to all take the gold plunder from Egypt and give it to Aaron. And that's when Aaron said he threw it into the fire and out popped a golden calf. But it was the patriarchs of the families that were leading the people. And God was issuing a warning to them in this moment. What is the iniquity of the fathers as far as the generations are concerned? So we heard the third generation, the fourth generation. But what generation were they? The first generation. So I want you to think about the first generation. What happened to them on that day? That Moses was speaking to, that God was addressing through Moses, through Aaron. What happened to that first generation? Well, God eventually punished the first generation who did not heed his warning. And it is this punishment that would also punish up to the third and the fourth generation for 40 years. So we need to understand that there was a specific punishment being made, not a generalization of God's nature applied to irresistible cursing of generations. In Numbers 14:26 proves this. 26 through 34. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? He's referring to that first generation. I've heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number listed in the census for 20 years old and upward who have grumbled against me. Not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness. You see how that is exactly what God said would happen if they didn't heed his warning. That he would visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children. He's saying your little ones are going to suffer for your faithlessness. And they suffered for 40 years wandering right next to them. But they were blessed because they could go into the promised land. But that first generation did not. Notice it says, until the last day of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. Verse 34, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days a year for each day, you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. They wandered 1 year for every day Israel spied out the promised land. God meant what he said. And I wonder if they thought every day of those 40 years, if we had just heeded his warning. As fathers, God meant that he was going to visit our iniquities on our third and fourth generation. The very generation that they were saying, we can't wander, we can't go through the wilderness, our little ones will suffer. Oh, they were going to suffer. But not because of God, but because of their iniquity. God would by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. This goes to show that God means what he says, and he says what he means. He warned the people that this would happen, and they didn't heed. So tonight, I was thinking about for our devotional, may we as leaders in our homes, leaders of our children, our grandchildren, or leaders in our communities, may we as individuals be the Joshuas and the Calebs in the midst of an assembly that might not turn their eyes toward God, may turn their back on God. But may we be like Joshua and Caleb, who stand firm because they were able to go into the promised land. May we be as Joshuas and Calebs in a world that does not heed the warning. Tonight, we have an invitation. And it's one that it helps us recognize that God is a steadfast and loving God who offers forgiveness. But it's on his terms. And we've got to respond to his word. We have to obey his word. It's not about our feelings. It's not about what we think. It's not about what the world is doing. We follow God. May we heed this warning tonight. Tonight, are you a child of God? You see, we don't have to experience the punishment of generations. We don't have to experience those things because Jesus came and he walked among us. In fact, he walked for 40 days in the wilderness, and he fasted one day for every year that the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness. He was the bread of life, come to this world to give sustenance to all people, to right the wrongs that were done by generations before him. Only through Jesus will we be able to walk with God again. We can access the bread of life through Jesus, like that manna that fell in the wilderness. God will take care of you. He takes care of me if we respond according to his word. Tonight, if we can encourage you, if we can pray with you, if you have a need, please come while together we stand and as we sing.